In the high-stakes world of digital storytelling, there is nothing more essential than a narrative that breathes. You have come to the right place. Welcome to a realm where every sentence is crafted to captivate, and every plot twist is designed to keep your audience scrolling until the very last word. If you are looking for content that resonates, hooks the imagination, and builds a dedicated community, you are exactly where you need to be. My channel is dedicated to bringing you these kinds of intense, emotionally resonant, and expertly paced stories every single week. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the deep dives into the human condition and the gripping sagas we explore together. We pride ourselves on pushing the boundaries of traditional storytelling, ensuring that every video is a fresh experience that keeps you coming back for more. Now let's lose ourselves in the story of Sloane. The hospital's notification did not escape my mother's notice. She took the call while relaxing at a high-end luxury resort. "I am not departing for administrative obligations," she informed the trauma specialist, while I remained 40 miles distant, 15 years of age, and only 5 days shy of 16, battling a collapsed lung and a critical medical consent form that lacked a valid signature. I am Sloane Miller. Within our family dynamic, I was labeled the resilient one, the daughter who managed the chaos. From the somber atmosphere of my father's funeral to the unpredictable shifts in my mother's temperament, I was the pillar that held everything together in those quiet spaces where an adult should have stood, but consistently failed to appear. That Tuesday, my resilience failed me. I was unconscious, trapped in the darkness of trauma. My grandmother received the emergency notification near midnight, navigating the winding roads from a neighboring state under the cloak of night. By the time the sun climbed over the horizon, an emergency guardianship document sat on the tray beside my bedside, and noticeably, my mother's name was absent from the legal filing. 48 hours later, she arrived in a whirlwind, declaring her inability to cope, only to fall silent the moment she finally grasped what my father had meticulously constructed and obscured before his passing. If you find yourself questioning what a man on the brink of death would conceal from his own spouse, and for what purpose, bear with me. That revelation forms the backbone of this entire narrative, and it is far more unsettling and calculated than you might currently perceive. My name is Sloane Miller, and to comprehend the significance of the paper resting on that hospital tray, we must first traverse the past together. We must return to a manicured, emerald lawn suburb on the outskirts of Phoenix, and the singular term everyone utilized to describe me, as if it were a precious commodity. I was 7, and a greeting card sat on the granite kitchen island, inscribed with my name in my mother's signature elegant script. Inside, 2 $20 bills were folded neatly, accompanied by a single sentence: "For whatever you desire, my love, you always possess the best judgment." She was in Scottsdale that afternoon, finalizing the purchase of a sprawling estate featuring a pool that the brochure depicted as shimmering glass. My birthday fell on a Saturday. That card had been resting on the counter since Thursday. I trained myself to label that behavior as affection, because the alternative was to categorize it as something far more neglectful. And I was only 7. In our master-planned community of the East Valley, where the desert landscape had been forcibly transformed into uniform, vibrant lawns, and every residential cul-de-sac boasted its own monthly newsletter, a mother's reputation was a public asset. A daughter who failed to shine was an error in the ledger that the neighbors would identify long before you ever did. My mother shone with a blinding intensity. She was the top producer in her firm for 3 consecutive years. Her portrait graced the transit benches outside the local grocery store. Her very name became a synonym for success at the annual school auctions. And I was the convenient one, the low-maintenance daughter, the child who could be entrusted with a card and 2 banknotes, and who would dutifully send a message of gratitude by noon. "You are so incredibly self-sufficient, baby," she would remark, already halfway into her luxury vehicle. "Thank heaven one of you is manageable. One of you." During the slow, empty hours after the garage door rumbled shut, I often pondered who the difficult child was. We had no other siblings. It took me a significant amount of time to realize that the only other individual in that household who had ever proven difficult to manage was my father, and he had addressed it in the quietest, most profound way a man could, by leaving me a roadmap that I would not discover for many years. Being easy was not a personality trait, It was an employment contract. I simply did not realize yet that I had been recruited. There is a singular evening I have preserved in my memory. I was 9, battling a fever the school nurse had reported around midday. My mother had a high-stakes closing she could not postpone, so I navigated the bus ride home alone and retreated to my bed with a thermometer and a lukewarm glass of ginger ale. My father discovered me at 8 o'clock, still clad in my school uniform, the thermometer displaying a value that transformed his expression instantly. He did not lecture, and he did not summon her. He sat on the edge of the mattress, resting his palm flat against my forehead, and remained silent for a long time. Then he uttered something I would not comprehend for years. "You shouldn't have to be this proficient at being solitary." I assured him that I didn't mind. He observed me as if that single word had exacted a heavy toll on him. I recognize now that he was already calculating the cost of my survival. My father's workshop carried the scent of cedar and machine oil, and on Saturdays, it was permeated by the aroma of coffee that had gone cold in a thermos he never quite finished. Miller and daughter cabinetry, the weathered sign stated, though there was no daughter mentioned, only the legacy. The Miller was my grandfather, deceased before my arrival, and my father preserved the name with religious devotion. He constructed objects designed to outlast their utility: window seats, spice racks sculpted like ocean waves, and a cedar chest with dovetail joints that he sanded by hand for nearly a month, never revealing its intended purpose to a soul. He was the one who attended every school recital. He applauded for an uncomfortable amount of time. He stood at the back of the auditorium in his rugged work boots while the other fathers donned crisp golf shirts, and he remained indifferent to the judgment, and I loved him with the uncomplicated, absolute certainty of having exactly one sanctuary in this world. Then, during the autumn of my 13th year, his heart ceased in his truck at the lumberyard without warning, except of course there had been a warning, a subtle one from a cardiologist 2 years prior that he had shielded from me entirely. My grandmother, Marion Miller, my father's mother, a woman who measured twice and spoke once, traveled for the funeral and remained for a week. On the final evening, while drying a dish she had already meticulously cleaned, she observed, "Your father always anticipated things 3 steps ahead." I inquired as to her meaning. She placed the plate on the rack. "He made formal arrangements," she stated. "That is the extent of what I will divulge for now." The cedar chest accompanied her home to New Mexico, securely locked. I requested once if I could peek inside. She held my gaze for a long moment, a silence that felt like a wall. The chest remained locked. And so did she. 5 days before my 16th birthday, my mother scheduled a wellness retreat at a resort 40 miles north. The type of establishment featuring eucalyptus-infused towels and profound, curated silence. "You don't mind, do you?" she asked, her thumb scrolling incessantly on her screen. "You never mind." I did not mind. That was the absolute truth and simultaneously the entirety of the crisis, and I lacked the vocabulary at the time to distinguish between the two. That Tuesday commenced with utter normalcy. A peer 2 grades ahead and recently licensed was driving us to inspect a vehicle. My vehicle, theoretically, a reliable sedan my father's insurance had quietly procured, resting in our driveway like a promise that no one had bothered to explain to me. I vividly recall the seatbelt pulling taut across my collarbone. I recall a green light. I recall the internal decision to text my mother that we would return by 6. I do not recall the truck that ignored the red light. There exists a void where the subsequent chapter should reside. The medical professionals filled it later with clinical sterile observations, the force of the impact, the emergency airlift, the lung that had surrendered. But in the landscape of my own recollection, there is only the tension of the seatbelt, the flicker of the green light, and then a ceiling I did not recognize, a metal tray that felt alien, and a singular document that would illuminate more about my family dynamics than 16 years of cohabitation ever had. I never minded. That was the root of the problem. The ballroom featured a chandelier the size of a compact car and carpeting designed to absorb every trace of sound, and I stood there clutching a glass of ice water that wept condensation onto my palm, while 400 real estate professionals cheered for my mother. This was the Regional Awards Gala, during the spring of my 15th year. 200 guests occupied the tables, and 200 more stood along the perimeter. President's Circle, Top 3 in the East Valley. She strode to the stage, addressed the audience with the practiced poise of someone who understood the color of money, and expressed gratitude to her clients, her team, the market, and finally, the Lord, in roughly that order of importance. I had something to share with her. Earlier that week, I had secured second place in a regional academic competition, a legitimate accomplishment, complete with a medal nestled in a velvet case. And I had been carrying this news for 3 days, waiting for the opportune moment. I imagined the gala might serve as that window. Watching her command the stage, I dared to hope that tonight, there might be space for me. Back at our table, a woman draped in pearls leaned toward me and inquired, "And who is this lovely young lady?" The medal remained in my bag beneath the table, hidden within its velvet casing. I left it there, beneath the heavy linen, where no one would witness it. I traced the ridged circumference of the medal with my thumb until the metal grew warm against my skin. That was a ritual I had developed. When there was no designated place to deposit a volatile emotion, I entrusted it to an inanimate object and allowed that object to shoulder the burden for me. The woman in pearls offered a polite smile and returned to her wine. But there was a fleeting half-second, a micro-expression I captured, where her gaze shifted from my mother's radiant face to mine and faltered. 200 people were applauding for her. Here is the specific moment that fundamentally altered my interior landscape. And it wasn't the words she uttered. It was the silence that followed. I waited. I want to be profoundly precise about this, because precision is the only weapon she could never manipulate or reframe. I remained at that table and waited for a single adult, any adult, to articulate the simple pedestrian observation. "That's a sharp kid. You must be incredibly proud." Anything at all. There were 8 individuals at the table. I calculated the second someone could have legitimately spoken, marking time on my fingers. I eventually ran out of fingers. No one uttered a single syllable. This wasn't due to inherent cruelty. It was due to a collective consensus. In that room, the narrative of my existence had already been drafted, circulated, and ratified. The story dictated that Sloane raises herself, Sloane is perfectly fine, Sloane requires absolutely nothing, and one does not correct a narrative that everyone finds so tremendously convenient. The silence was not a clerical error. It was a pact. I understood at 15, while holding that warming piece of metal under a tablecloth, that I had been raised by a consensus. And a consensus is nearly impossible to combat, because there is no individual adversary to engage. There is only a room, unified in their silent nodding. This phenomenon was not confined to that ballroom. The consensus permeated 100 minor interactions. There was a neighbor, Donna Petrick, who managed the neighborhood's digital group chat and organized the school fundraisers. For years, she had referred to me as the easy Miller girl with genuine if shallow fondness, the way one might compliment a houseplant that never requires hydration. Once, when I was 12 and my mother had neglected to retrieve me from school, I walked the 2 miles home in the blistering August heat. Donna passed me in her SUV, slowed to wave, and proceeded on her way. She later recounted to my mother how impressive my independence was, how well raised I had been. My mother agreed. They both genuinely believed they were offering me a compliment. That is the intrinsic danger of a consensus. From the interior, it doesn't manifest as neglect. It feels like an entire community admiring your fortitude while they simultaneously and quietly decide you have no need for any of theirs. There was exactly one person who had ever refused to sign on to that consensus, and he had been buried for 2 years. The drive home is where the secondary threat emerges, though I was unaware it was a threat at the time. She steered with one hand while keeping her phone pressed to her ear, the highway lights pulsing through the windshield in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that washed over her face and then mine. Her award rested in the back seat, encased in its block of acrylic, refracting light each time we passed under a lamp. She wasn't communicating with a client. I could discern this by the modulation of her voice, which had shed its showroom warmth. "I informed you the carrying costs are eroding my margins," she stated, her tone low, as if she had momentarily forgotten my presence in the passenger seat. "No, I cannot subsidize that again." A pause. "Then we liquidate the Vista parcel. We absorb the loss. We pivot." Another pause. Longer this time. "I will engineer a solution. I always engineer a solution." She terminated the call and placed the phone face down on her thigh, and her exterior warmth clicked back into place like a thermostat adjusting to a set temperature. "You are so incredibly easy to travel with," she remarked, beaming at the highway. "With you, I never have to experience a moment of anxiety." I observed the award sliding across the back seat and the phone discarded on her lap, and I performed the survival maneuver I had mastered. I filed it. Carrying costs. The Vista parcel. Subsidize that again. It would be months before those terms acquired concrete meaning. But I had developed a habit over the years of retaining the fragments I could not yet decipher. The overheard numerical figure. The door slammed with a fraction too much velocity. The name on a piece of correspondence that didn't align with the narrative I had been fed. I was unaware that I was building a case. I believed I was merely practicing vigilance, because practicing vigilance was the only form of affection I knew how to offer that no one could return to me in a stamped envelope. I did not realize that night that the fragments I was meticulously filing would eventually reside in a folder on a legal counselor's desk and serve to determine my future. I only recognized that the woman beside me occupied a subterranean existence that I was forbidden to enter, that the locked portal to that existence possessed a numerical code, and that the number was steadily climbing. Carrying costs? I filed that away into the darkness. The ceiling tile materialized before any other sensory input. Acoustic patterns. A water stain resembling a landmass I could not identify. A fluorescent panel humming with an industrial, nervous energy somewhere behind my skull. Then the scent. Antiseptic. And beneath it, faintly, the cedar and machine oil ghost of my father's flannel. I would discover later that my grandmother had secreted it beneath the hospital bedding, because she lacked the capacity to do anything else with her trembling hands. Her hands. That is the subsequent memory I hold. Marion Miller was slumbering in the vinyl chair adjacent to my bed, sitting rigid, and her hands were clasped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since surrendered its heat. They were vibrating. Not merely trembling. Shifting. The fine, incessant vibration of a human frame that has traversed over 400 miles through the void of night, fueled by zero sleep and a singular, devastating telephone notification, and had not yet permitted itself the mercy of a pause. A nurse arrived to monitor the 4 lines. Her nameplate identified her as Robin Caldwell. She observed my eyes flickering open, and she eschewed the performative, cheery facade nurses often employ. She leaned close and whispered, "There you are. You are under no obligation to be composed for my benefit, dear. Nobody in this room requires you to be fine." I struggled to process that statement. No one had ever initiated a conversation with such radical permission. They had already accomplished the emergency interventions. I reconstructed the timeline over the subsequent hour. A collapsed lung does not wait for a signature. The chest tube had been inserted within minutes of my arrival, while I remained a complete stranger to every individual in that building. Because that is the mandate of hospitals when a child is perishing before their eyes. The signature wasn't for the act of salvation. The signature was for the aftermath of salvation. Who determines the trajectory? Who possesses the authority to occupy that chair and provide consent for the scan or reject that transfer? Who is granted the status of the adult in the room during the grueling days required for a shattered body to reassemble itself? On the tray adjacent to the bed, there was a single sheet of paper. A legal order, authorized in the hollow hours of the morning. Temporary guardianship granted to Marion Miller. One document. My mother's name was conspicuously absent. She arrived 48 hours later, acting like a catastrophic weather event. The door collided with the rubber stopper, and there she stood. My mother. Designer sunglasses still shielding her eyes, a professional tote over one shoulder, and a laptop secured under her arm as if she had been conducting business from the driver's seat. The initial utterance that escaped her lips was a verb directed at my grandmother. "She can't." Then she faltered, because she had finally observed the tray. She had observed the court order. I watched her gaze descend upon the document and traverse the legal terminology. I witnessed the precise, agonizing microsecond she comprehended the nature of the text. This was no clerical error by a stranger. This was no hospital overstepping its B.